The old man learned the lesson. I never thought that a Christmas dinner could change everything. Seated at the table, supported on crutches after the mysterious accident, I observed my son-in-law Richard with a smile that held decades of calculated silence. He did not know, but each movement of mine was a piece of a chess game that I had been preparing meticulously. My name is Robert Mitchell, 68 years old, retired civil engineer from Portland, Oregon. I built empires not only with concrete and steel, but with patience and strategy. My life always was about structures, be they buildings or plans for revenge. 2 weeks before that fateful dinner, I discovered something that would change forever the meaning of the word family. My daughter Sarah, a brilliant lawyer in Chicago, had confided in me a devastating secret. Richard, my apparently perfect son-in-law, was diverting funds from the family company and planned to have me committed to a nursing home to take total control of our patrimony of $42 million. The accident that left me with crutches. Pure staging. Each movement was calculated like an engineering project. Millimeter precision, impeccable execution. While everyone saw me as a victim, I was the architect of my own revenge. "Is everything okay, Father?" Sarah asked me, serving the turkey. Her eyes transmitted complicity. She knew exactly what was to come. Richard continued to babble about his investments, completely oblivious to the tsunami that was approaching. Each word of his was more proof for the dossier that I had assembled: documents, bank statements, compromising emails. Everything carefully filed, waiting for the exact moment. My wife, Elizabeth, always quiet, observed me. Decades of marriage allowed us to communicate entire worlds just with a look. She knew that something grand was about to happen. "Richard," I pronounced, interrupting his litany about investment funds, "you said that the old man learned the lesson." My smile was icy, calculated. "Ah, my son-in-law, what an interesting lesson this night will be." Every detail of my plan had been thought out like an engineering project: solid foundations, precise structures, and an inevitable result. Richard had not the slightest idea that, at that moment, his world about to collapse had been meticulously designed by me. The turkey was cooling on the plate. The night had barely begun, and the true spectacle was about to be revealed. Continue watching. Well, that depends on what you consider justice. The next few minutes would reveal a plan as meticulously constructed as the skyscrapers I designed during my career. Richard thought he knew me, a retired engineer, quiet, apparently harmless. But men like me learn a lot by observing, calculating, waiting for the exact moment. My story began long before this Christmas. 40 years of work, sacrifices, building not only concrete structures, but a family empire that Richard saw only as an opportunity for greed. Every cent that I earned, every project that I developed, had a purpose beyond the simple accumulation of wealth. Sarah knew everything. My daughter, a brilliant lawyer, had been my eye and ear inside this complex plan of recovery and justice. When she showed me the first evidence of Richard's diversions, I did not hesitate. An engineer knows that structural problems, if not corrected, can make the entire building collapse. The details were precise, like an architectural project. Richard had diverted $3.7 million through a series of complex banking transactions, believing that no one would ever discover. He used offshore accounts, shell companies, and entire financial engineering that he thought was invisible. But engineers like me see beyond what is on the surface. Every diversion leaves trails. Every lie has a fragile foundation. And I spent the last 18 months building the most solid case possible. Elizabeth, my wife, was always my silent partner in this mission. Decades of marriage allowed us to communicate entire worlds with a simple look. She knew that each movement of mine was calculated. Each word had a purpose. "Want more turkey, Richard?" Elizabeth asked, her soft voice hiding a storm about to be unleashed. The son-in-law smiled, completely unaware of the abyss that would open in a matter of minutes. His arrogance was his greatest enemy. His confidence in seeming untouchable would be his ruin. The next moments would determine not only the fate of Richard, but the future of our entire family. A lesson was about to be learned, and it would be a lesson that no one would ever forget. My career as a civil engineer was always about anticipating failures, identifying weak points before they compromised the entire structure. Richard was exactly like a poorly planned project, apparently solid, but with fundamental cracks in his ethics and character. Everything began when I bought that land in Portland, an investment that seemed insignificant at the time. 16 acres of apparently worthless land, located strategically near an area of urban expansion. Richard never imagined the true purpose of that acquisition. In the weeks following my accident, while everyone believed that I was debilitated, I was actually building the most solid case possible against my son-in-law. Each document, each email, each banking transaction would be a piece in a puzzle of exposure and justice. Sarah had helped me to map every movement of Richard. As a lawyer, she knew exactly how to transform evidence into a damning sentence. Our plan was more than revenge. It was a structural correction in a family that was about to collapse. The proofs were irrefutable. 3 offshore bank accounts, systematic diversions of funds from the family company, false documents created to cover up illegal transactions. Richard believed he was smart, but he did not know the real meaning of strategic planning. Elizabeth observed me with that knowing look that we built over 40 years of marriage. It was not anger that I saw in her eyes, but a cold and calculated determination. She knew, just like me, that some lessons are only truly learned when paid with the highest possible price. "More wine, Richard?" I asked, serving him generously. Each gesture was part of the ritual that we were preparing meticulously. The Christmas dinner would be his judgment. Not a violent or dramatic judgment, but a surgical exposure of his true nature. Each person there present would witness not only his fall, but the reconstruction of family integrity. My plan was as precise as the bridge projects that I designed throughout my life. No detail was left to chance. Richard would be dismantled piece by piece, exactly like a condemned structure. 15 years before this Christmas, when Richard met Sarah at a corporate law conference in Chicago, no one could imagine what was to come. He seemed the perfect son-in-law, intelligent, ambitious, apparently committed to family values. But I always knew how to see beyond appearances. As an engineer, I learned that every structure has points of vulnerability. Humans are exactly the same. Richard had a fundamental weakness. His greed was greater than his loyalty, and that would be his ruin. The land in Portland that I bought decades ago was not just a real estate investment. It was part of a broader plan, a piece of a puzzle that only now would begin to reveal its true form. Those 16 acres hid secrets that Richard would never suspect. Sarah had spent months gathering evidence, documenting every irregular financial movement. Like an engineer of the law, she built her case with the same precision with which I designed structures. Each document was a pillar, each email a main beam of her argumentation. Richard did not know, but every cent diverted was documented. $3,700,000 moved through offshore accounts. Front companies created strategically to hide illegal transactions. He thought he was smart, but he did not know the real meaning of strategic planning. "A little more turkey, Richard," Elizabeth asked, her soft voice hiding the storm about to be unleashed. The son-in-law smiled, completely unaware of the abyss that would open in a matter of minutes. His arrogance was his greatest enemy. His confidence in seeming untouchable would be his ruin. I remembered the first project that I designed in my career, a bridge in Vancouver that was supposed to connect 2 banks apparently impossible to be united. At that time, everyone said it was madness, but I saw beyond the obvious. I glimpsed possibilities where others only saw obstacles. Richard would be my metaphorical bridge on that night, a connection between the hidden truth and the justice that would be finally revealed. My accident with the crutches was just another piece on the board. While everyone believed that I was debilitated, in reality I was stronger and more strategic than ever. Each movement was calculated, Each word had a specific purpose. Sarah looked at me discreetly. Our gazes met, a silent communication built over years of complicity. She knew that the moment was near. The true lesson was about to be administered, and Richard would never forget this Christmas night. My life was always about building, not just bridges, buildings, or infrastructures, but also systems of protection, of justice. As an engineer, I learned that each structure needs to have solid foundations, and family should be the most important foundation of all. Richard did not know, but each movement of his had been being monitored for 36 months. Not for revenge, but for a sense of preservation, like a professional who identifies a structural defect before the entire construction collapses. The documents were prepared with the same precision that I used to calculate loads and stresses in my projects. Detailed spreadsheets, bank statements, compromising emails, everything organized in a specific folder that would be revealed on that night. Sarah had mapped every irregular transaction. As a lawyer specialized in corporate law, she understood that the true punishment would not come from violence, but from meticulous exposure. Richard would be destroyed not by brute force, but by the surgical precision of irrefutable evidence. The proofs showed not only diversion of funds, but a complex money laundering scheme that involved 3 front companies and offshore accounts in tax havens. Each document was a piece of a puzzle that, when assembled, would reveal the true face of Richard. Elizabeth observed me. 40 years of marriage allowed us to communicate entire worlds through a simple look. She knew that that night would change forever the family dynamic. "More wine?" I asked Richard, generously serving his glass. Each gesture was part of a meticulously planned ritual. The Christmas dinner would be his judgment. Not a violent or dramatic judgment, but a surgical exposure of his true nature. Each person there present would witness not only his fall, but the reconstruction of family integrity. I remembered a fundamental principle of engineering. Every structure has a critical failure point. For bridges, it is the connections between beams. For families, it is the bonds of trust. And Richard had broken these bonds irreparably. The next moments would determine not only the fate of Richard, but the future of our entire family. A lesson was about to be learned, and it would be a lesson that no one would ever forget. Like a complex engineering project, the truth would be revealed piece by piece, with the precision of someone who built empires not only with concrete, but with integrity. Richard thought he knew me, a retired engineer, quiet, apparently harmless. But men like me learn a lot by observing, calculating, waiting for the exact moment. And that moment had arrived. Men like me learn a lot by observing, calculating, waiting for the exact moment. And that moment had arrived. 40 years in the construction market taught me that nothing is what it seems. Each project, each construction hides stories behind its walls. My family would be no different, a complex structure with invisible cracks that needed to be repaired. Richard represented these cracks, a financial parasite who saw our family as an opportunity for quick enrichment, not as a legacy to be preserved and honored. When Sarah showed me the first evidence of the financial diversions, I did not hesitate. An engineer knows that structural problems, if not corrected quickly, can make the entire building collapse. The proofs were more than numbers on a spreadsheet. They represented the betrayal of someone who should protect and respect the family. $3,700,000 diverted through a complex financial engineering, offshore accounts, shell companies, meticulously hidden transactions. Richard did not know, but every cent diverted had been tracked with the same precision that I used to calculate loads on bridges and skyscrapers. No detail would escape our investigation. Sarah, my lawyer daughter, had spent months building an irrefutable case. Each document, each email, each transaction would be a piece in a puzzle of exposure and justice. The Christmas dinner would be more than a family meal. It would be the stage for a revelation that would change forever our history. Elizabeth observed me. silent accomplice of decades. Our gazes met, a communication built over 40 years of marriage. She knew that the moment of truth was near. "More turkey?" I asked Richard, serving him generously. Each gesture was part of a meticulously planned ritual. The trap was about to close. Not with violence, not with screams or excessive dramas, but with the surgical precision of someone who spent decades building and unraveling complex structures. Richard smiled, completely unaware of the abyss that would open in a matter of minutes. His arrogance would be his greatest enemy. His confidence in seeming untouchable would be his definitive ruin. The next moments would determine not only the fate of Richard, but the future of our entire family. A lesson was about to be learned, and it would be a lesson that no one would ever forget. Prepare yourself, because the true story is about to begin. Every great construction begins with a plan, and my plan against Richard had been architected with the same precision that I designed bridges that defied gravity. 36 months of silent investigation, each movement calculated, each piece of evidence carefully collected. Richard thought he was smart, but he did not know the real meaning of strategy. The documents were ready. Not just papers, but sentences of a truth that long ago needed to be revealed. Each page represented a layer of lies that would be demolished on that night. Sarah had mapped every irregular transaction with the precision of an architect drawing floor plans. Offshore accounts, shell companies, meticulous diversions, everything would be exposed. At that Christmas dinner, Richard would be more than unmasked. He would be deconstructed piece by piece, exactly like a condemned structure. The true engineering is not always in the calculations of concrete and steel. Sometimes it is in the capacity to rebuild what was broken, to restore family integrity. And that would be our masterpiece. Family secrets are like complex engineering structures. They appear solid on the surface, but can collapse with the slightest movement in the right foundations. My story did not begin on that Christmas night. It began decades before, when I learned that true strength is not in violence, but in strategic patience. Like an architect who designs a bridge to resist decades of weathering, I had designed my revenge with the same precision. Portland, Oregon, a city whose every street curve I knew, every detail of its urban evolution, just as I knew every movement of Richard, not out of obsession, but out of a need for preservation. The first signs of betrayal did not come from documents or banking transactions. They came from small gestures, furtive glances, interrupted conversations. An engineer learns to read beyond the obvious, to interpret micro-movements as structural signs of imminent failure. Sarah, my daughter, had inherited this capacity for observation. A brilliant lawyer, she saw the world not as a set of laws, but as a complex system of connections and consequences. When she showed me the first evidence against Richard, there was no surprise in my eyes, only the confirmation of something that I already suspected. $3,700,000. It was not just a number. It was the exact measure of Richard's greed, calculated with the same precision that I used to size loads in construction projects. Every cent diverted represented a brick in the construction of his own destruction. Elizabeth, my wife, knew everything. 40 years of marriage allowed us communications that went far beyond words. A look, a movement of an eyebrow, a sigh, we were capable of building entire narratives without pronouncing a single word. The offshore accounts were just the tip of the iceberg. Richard had created a web of shell companies so complex that it seemed almost a financial work of art. But just as every construction has its vulnerability points, every illegal scheme possesses fundamental cracks. I remembered a bridge project in Vancouver, considered impossible by all the other engineers. I saw beyond the apparent limitations. I glimpsed possibilities where others only saw obstacles. Richard would be my new engineering project, a structure to be dismantled, piece by piece. The land in Portland that I bought decades ago was not a common real estate investment. It was part of a meticulous plan that only now would begin to reveal its true form. 16 acres of land that would keep the secret of my strategy of family reconstruction. Each document, each email, each irregular transaction had been mapped with the precision of an architectural project. Sarah spent months building a case that would be more than a simple accusation. It would be a complete deconstruction of Richard's farce. The Christmas dinner would be more than a family meal. It would be the stage for a revelation that would transform forever our history. Not with violence, not with excessive drama, but with the surgical precision of someone who spent decades unraveling complex structures. "More turkey?" I asked, serving Richard with a smile that held decades of calculated silence. Each gesture was part of a meticulously planned ritual. The trap was about to close. Richard smiled, completely unaware of the abyss that would open in a matter of minutes. His arrogance would be his greatest enemy. His confidence in seeming untouchable would be his definitive ruin. Prepare yourself, because the true story is about to begin. And Richard would never forget this Christmas night. Justice, just like engineering, is not built overnight. It is built with patience, with method, with the certainty that each piece will find its exact place at the right moment. Each family has its own structural system, like a complex building with invisible foundations. Our foundations were formed by decades of sacrifices, silent investments, and a network of loyalties that Richard would never comprehend. My career as a civil engineer was not just about building physical structures. It was about understanding systems, predicting failures, anticipating collapses. Richard would be my most challenging project, a corrupted family system that needed to be completely rebuilt. In the months that preceded that Christmas, I transformed my supposed physical debility into a strategic advantage. The crutches were not a symbol of weakness, but of calculated mobility. While everyone saw me as a victim, I was in reality moving each piece of a family chess game that Richard could not even imagine. The shell companies that Richard created were like poorly designed concrete structures, apparently solid, but with fundamental cracks that would be enough to compromise the entire construction. Each document that Sarah collected was like a stress test revealing the vulnerabilities of that fraudulent system. The financial engineering of Richard was impressive at first glance. Offshore accounts distributed strategically, crossed transactions that would confuse any inattentive investigator. But for someone accustomed to analyzing complex projects, each movement was predictable as mathematical equations. I remembered a fundamental principle that I learned in the first years of college. Every structure has its critical failure point. For bridges, it is the connections between beams. For families, it is the bonds of trust. And Richard had broken these bonds irreparably. Elizabeth observed me with that look that crossed decades of complicity. Our 40 years of marriage allowed us to communicate entire worlds through a simple gesture, a movement of an eyebrow, a shared sigh. The turkey was cooling on the plate while the tension increased, imperceptible to Richard, but palpable to all the others. Each movement of ours was part of a ritual of exposure that he would never suspect. My revenge would not be violent. It would be surgical, precise, like the design of a bridge that defies all apparent limitations. Richard would be deconstructed not with brute force, but with the precision of someone who spent decades understanding how systems really work. The next moments would determine not only the fate of Richard, but the future of our entire family. A lesson was about to be learned, and it would be a lesson that no one would ever forget. The true architecture of justice is not built with anger. It is built with method, with patience, with the certainty that each piece will find its exact place at the precise moment. And that moment had arrived.